Hello and welcome to Top Deck. It's been a minute, hasn't it? Yes, today I really wanted to talk about the cards from Aetherdrift that I thought would be good in Pioneer. But before that, I just kind of wanted to mention where I've been at for a little bit because it's been like 3 weeks since my last upload, and that's not exactly the upload schedule I would like to have. So essentially, college happened. Those of you who have seen this channel before would probably guess that. We just ran into midterm season, and the classes that I didn't have exams for, I had like 15 pages of homework for. But other than that, I did get to do some pretty neat experiments where I measured the value of the Bohr magneton and the muon lifetime, and recently I also made antimatter in the lab. But all of this is really cool, but it doesn't exactly leave me a whole lot of time for making YouTube videos, which is unfortunate because I really enjoy this hobby, and I would do it a lot more often if I had the time. I also don't really I don't want to be putting out videos just for the sake of putting out videos. I want to be putting out videos of sufficient quality, and so I really don't just want to be throwing out slop because nobody wants to watch that. I don't like looking at it afterwards. That being said, this video is not going to be particularly high quality. I do apologize for that, but I did need to just get something out there to explain why I haven't uploaded in almost a month. But at the same time, like, I actually have to travel back home, and I'm going to be in a land of not particularly good internet for a bit, and so I won't be able to upload while there. But while I'm there, I should be able to script out and plan for some very good videos coming back, or at least quality-wise. So I'm really looking forward to that. But for now, let's get into the cards I think will be good in Pioneer from Aetherdrift. First up, honorable mentions. This set has 6 vanilla creatures in it, and 5 of them are part of this Tyrant cycle. I mean, legendary creatures with just insane stats. I always will shout out the vanilla creatures because vanilla creatures are awesome. This one in particular, Calaxian the Hunger Tyrant, I actually want to build a deck around in Pioneer. To give you a hint to what deck I will be building around Calaxian, your hint is Lean, Mean, Fat Grilling Machine. So if you think you understand what deck I'm going to build off of that using Calaxian, please let me know in the comments. I also wanted to point out Spectacular Pileup. I don't know if this card will be making so much of an impact in Pioneer, but I did think it would be good for control decks, because it's a 5-mana sweeper, and that's right in line with Sunfall, and if vehicle strategies become super popular in the format, this would be a great sweeper for the control deck. Also, it has cycling too, so if it's in your early hand and you don't need it, you can get rid of it really easily and exchange it for a better card. So now let's get into the cards that I'm a little more certain will have some impact in Pioneer. First up is Valor's Flagship. I really thought this card could go great into Greasefang decks because it has Crew 3, and Greasefang would be able to pull it out and be able to crew it in the same turn, which is really nice. It can also put itself into the graveyard from your hand really easily with the cycling ability. In my experience, the hardest part of playing Greasefang is when you just can't get a vehicle from your hand to the graveyard, and this card solves the problem. Additionally, when you do cycle it, you can actually create some creatures that will crew it later, if necessary. I don't think this is going to replace Parhelion 2 in any respect, but I think it should be like competing with Sky Sovereign Console Flagship or so. And I do think it's already seeing some play in that capacity. So yeah, Valor's Flagship, it's going to be making an impact in Pioneer. Next up is Riverchurn Monument. This card, I'm kind of speculative about, but I really think it could slot into a couple of different strategies in the format. First up is mill. It's a repeatable source of mills, and if you flood out, this card at least gives you something to do in a turn cycle. Also, if you can just get enough cards into your opponent's graveyard, Riverchurn Monument can kill your opponent with its exhaust ability. Furthermore, outside of mill, I think this card could go into self-mill decks, like Pioneer Dredge. Those decks are always playing some way to get creatures from their deck into their graveyard so they can be brought back alive for cheap. And I really think Riverchurn Monument would be able to slot in there as maybe a 1 of or a 2 of. So yes, Riverchurn Monument. Next up is Thopter Fabricator. This card I actually don't think slots into any existing deck in Pioneer. However, as it says, whenever you draw your second card each turn, you create a 1/1 colorless Thopter with flying. And I really think, since there are so many ways to draw 2 cards a turn in the format, this could spawn like a new draw two cards in turn deck. And this would be the engine of it. You could put it in with Ledger Shredders. You could be putting it in with. You could be playing it alongside Fairy Mastermind. You could probably be playing it with just any deck that runs a lot of cantrips. I really think this card has the potential to spawn a well-crafted deck. Next up is Bloodghast. Bloodghast used to see a lot of play in Modern, and I think it could see play in Pioneer as well. I think it could slot into decks like Pioneer Dredge, because it's really easy to bring back from the battlefield. Just play a land and poof, it's right back. That deck is already running Forsaken Miner, and that actually requires you to target your opponent with something. Playing a land, I think, would be much easier. Additionally, this card could slot into sacrifice strategies because it's so easily recurable. Furthermore, as long as your opponent has 10 or less life, this creature has haste. This will help it punch through the remaining points of damage if you can get your opponent low enough. The 5th card I want to talk about is Count on Luck. This card is essentially the red equivalent of Phyrexian Arena. There's no way you can convince me that this card is bad. I think this deck could slot into like the big red decks. The decks that have indestructible lands and use Cleansing Wildfire not as land destruction spell, but as a ramp spell. That deck wants to be playing for a long time, and this would help provide card advantage into the late game. Furthermore, I think it could slot into maybe a Jeskai control deck where you probably want to be drawing more cards than your opponent, and this card fits into that strategy pretty well. The 6th card I would like to discuss is Howlsquad Heavy. This card, now that I look at it now, it seemed I'm a little more speculative about it. It is a Start Your Engines card, and its last ability is only useful if you can obtain max speed. But if you can do that, adding red for each goblin you control will easily output 6 to 20 mana, depending on the board state. The reason that I'm starting to be a little more hesitant about this card is that it just gives other goblins haste. It doesn't give them +1/+1 and haste, and there are other 3 mana goblins that do both of those things. It does create a 1/1 every turn, which is really nice. There are just so many good 3-drop goblins at this point, Goblin Lords, that I don't know if this card is good enough to overtake those, but it is one to be considering if you're running a Goblins deck. Moving from one tribe to the next, we have March of the World Ooze. March of the World Ooze is 6 mana, 3 of which must be green, and it says creatures you control have base power and toughness 6/6 and are oozes in addition to their other types. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, if it's not their turn, you create a 3/3 green elephant creature token. You might suspect, as I said, for moving from one tribe to the next, you might think we are moving from goblins to oozes, but I actually think this card could see some play in an elves deck. I know I keep coming up with ways to improve the elves deck in Pioneer, but I think this one might help it out. First of all, 6 mana is nothing to the elves. Second of all, it makes all of your elves 6/6s, and it doesn't make them stop being elves, it just makes them an ooze in addition to their other types. So this would make it pretty easy to get a board full of like 8 to 10 power elves just on the battlefield. You could play this card on like turn 3 or turn 4, and then just turbo out a bunch of high-powered elves and just end the game quickly. Furthermore, since Pioneer's a highly interactive format, getting a 3/3 every time an opponent casts a spell on your turn is really good, because those 3/3s will also be 6/6s while March of the World Ooze is on the battlefield. I think this card has a lot of upside that I'm not sure people are considering for this format, and so I wanted to include it here in this list. Next up, we have my favorite card in the set. It's not my favorite card because of its stats or its abilities or really anything about it except for the first word on the card, Redshift. If you don't know what Redshift is, basically if you have a source like a galaxy and it's moving away from the observer, the frequency of the light gets lower as the source moves away, and therefore the wavelength becomes longer, or thus the light becomes redder, hence the name Redshift. Conversely, if your luminous source is moving towards the observer, the wavelength becomes smaller and the light becomes bluer, or blue shifting. Redshift is something that's very important to what I want to do professionally and to my studies, so I just loved it for that reason alone. That's why it's my favorite card. Personally, I also really enjoy the idea, like the imagery of a car moving away from you so fast that the light coming bouncing off of it is redshifted. That's just really funny for a racer set. Anyway, what decks do I think this will go in? There's only one that I think this card would see play in, and that would be Bard class. So if you don't know, Bard class lets you play legendary spells for red and green less. So what you end up doing is just spitting out a bunch of legendary creatures for free. Redshift would fit right in there, and you'd mostly be playing it for this add X mana of any one color, where X is Redshift's power. That deck pumps its creatures a lot, so you could, for an investment of 1 card, 0 mana, you could be getting like 6, 8, 10 mana out of it over the course of a game, which is just really high upside. So Bard class players, I think this one might find a home for you. Next up, we have the Aetherspark. All right, this one might be a trap. Like, I might be walking into a trap by saying this card will be, I think this card will be good, but I think it will. It's a 4 mana, 4 loyalty planeswalker, but it can gain loyalty pretty quickly if put in the right deck. You can activate its +1 to attach it to a creature you control and put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. And if you can deal damage with that creature, the Aetherspark gets that many +1 or that many loyalty counters on it. You can -5 it to draw 2 cards, or you can -10 it to add 10 mana of any one color. Put into the right deck, like a big stompy deck, you could easily be ultimating this couple times a game. However, the downside is that the turn it comes down, you're spending 4 mana to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. And that creature might not even be able to deal damage. So, am I convinced this card is going to shake the format a lot? No, but I think it could have the potential. Like, put it in the right deck, its ceiling is very high. Put it in, I think, any other deck, and its floor is, well, below the actual floor. So, but I really think this is something you should be considering if you are playing a big stompy deck and you have a few slots to spare. Last but not least, we have the enemy Verge cycle of lands, or as I like to call them, the unlock lands. The allied Verges were released in Duskmourn, and they've been seeing play in Standard. They've been seeing play in Pioneer. I wouldn't be surprised if they're seeing play further back than that, too, just because it's a great way to get an untapped dual land into play really easily. I fully expect these to be integrated into just about every deck in the format. I don't really have a whole lot to say about them because it's land. Enough said. Well, that's about all I've got today. I've got to get to class in about 30 minutes, so that'll be fun. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll be seeing you in a little bit. Have a great day, everyone. See you around.